Bring me a clean cup, you slack-handed fool, or I'll bring my boot to you instead." That was the first thing the loud man said inside my walls, and I have run the Saltway Inn for 31 years. I have heard drovers swear and lords sigh and soldiers go silent over their bread, but I knew at the first sentence that this one was going to be a long night. He had thrown the words at my serving boy Tam, who is 12 and quick and frightened of nothing except being shouted at, which is the one thing a serving boy cannot avoid. The cup in Tam's hand was clean. I had washed it myself an hour before in water I had carried from the well in the cold, because the Saltway is 2 days from anywhere, and you carry your own everything out here on the high road, and a man who has carried his own water for 31 years knows a clean cup when he holds one. I came out from behind the counter wiping my hands, the way I always do when I mean to put myself between a guest and trouble. "It's clean, sir," I said. "I'll fetch you another gladly, but that one's clean." He turned on me then, and I got my first proper look at him. A big man, broad through the shoulders, with a soft heaviness under the broadness that told you he had been strong once and was now mostly loud. Good coat. Very good coat, wine-dark wool with silver thread at the cuffs, the kind of coat that costs more than my inn earns in a season, and worn the way some men wear a fine coat, as if it were a writ that made everything they did lawful. Rings on 3 fingers. A face gone florid with road wine and self-regard. He looked at me the way you'd look at a dog that had spoken. "And who," he said, "are you?" "Halding Crow, sir, the keeper. This is my house." "Your house?" He smiled, and it was not a smile that meant anything good. "Then your house has a filthy cup and a filthy boy and a keeper who argues with his betters. Wonderful. Bring wine." "The good wine, not the swill you pour for these." He flicked his rings at the room behind him, at the dozen souls who were trying very hard in that moment to look like furniture. I should tell you who was in my common room that night, because they are the whole of this story, more than the loud man is, more than even the still one in the corner is. There was old Mother Sennett and her daughter, going east to a wedding, both of them in their best shawls and both of them now looking at their hands. There was Pell the carter and his 2 sons, big, slow, honest men who hauled salt over the pass and who could have folded the loud man in half between them and who did not, because Pell had taught his boys that you do not start what you cannot finish in front of women and children. There was a tinker. There was a young couple I did not know, hardly more than children themselves, going somewhere with everything they owned in 2 sacks. And there was the family in the far corner, a gray-haired man, a woman, and a girl of perhaps 8 who held a wooden horse in her lap and watched the room with the wide, steady eyes of a child who has been taught to be still. And there was the guard. I had not marked him as a guard, not at first. He had come in near dusk, ahead of the loud man's party by perhaps an hour, and he had taken bread and water, only water, and he had sat himself with his back to the wall in the corner nearest the family with the girl, and he had been so quiet that my eye had simply slid off him the way your eye slides off a familiar thing. A plain dark traveling cloak, heavy and good but plain, boots that had been walked in, a young man's face, though not soft, a face that had been finished early. He sat the way I have seen perhaps 3 men in my life sit, with a stillness that was not rest. Rest is loose. This was the other thing. This was the stillness of a man who is doing his work, and whose work happens to look, to the careless eye, like sitting in a corner doing nothing at all. I brought the loud man his wine. The good wine, because it is cheaper to lose a bottle than a tooth, and a keeper learns that arithmetic young. He took it without thanks and drank it without tasting it and called for more before he had finished, and somewhere in there he settled on the carter's table as the next thing he would own. "You," he said to Pell, "that's a good table, big table, I'll have it." "We're at it, friend," Pell said, mild as milk. "I'm not your friend and you'll move." He had a way of saying things that left no air after them, the way a man does who has been moved for his whole life and has forgotten that it was ever a courtesy and not a law of the world. "Keeper, move them." Now I will tell you the truth of how an inn works on the high road, because you may think a keeper is a king in his own house, and he is not. I am 2 days from any magistrate. I am one man and a wife and a boy and a cook, and the nearest help is the help that happens to be under my roof on any given night, and that help has its own road to walk in the morning, and no wish to walk it nursing a broken hand. A loud rich man with rings is, out here, very nearly a law unto himself, because the law is far and he is near, and he knows it, and that knowing is the engine of every cruel thing he does. He cheats and he shoves and he sneers because no one will write it down and no one will read it back to him, and he has built his whole life on the wager that this is always true. So I did the thing that keepers do. I tried to buy the piece small. "Pell," I said quietly, "would you and the boys take the window bench? I'll bring you the pie myself on the house." And Pell, God bless him, who understood my arithmetic better than I did, rose and took his sons to the window without a word, and the loud man took the big table as if it had always been his, and I thought, that's one storm bought cheap, and I was a fool, because that kind of man does not stop when he wins. He starts. He spread himself across the carter's table. He called for food and sent it back. He called Tam over to send it back again, and when Tam came, he took the boy by the wrist, not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to own, and held him there while he listed everything wrong with my house slowly, for the pleasure of the room hearing it. And Tam stood with his wrist held and his face white and his eyes going to me, and I started forward, and the loud man saw me start and smiled wider, because that was the thing he wanted. He wanted me to come. He wanted the keeper to bristle so he could put the keeper down in front of everyone, and then there would be no one left in the room who would dare so much as cough at him, and he would have the inn whole, the way a man takes a town. I have thought about that night a great many times since, and I have come to believe that cruelty of that particular kind is not hot. It is cold. It is patient. It is a builder. He was building something in my common room, brick by brick, the boy's wrist, the carter's table, my started step, and what he was building was a little kingdom in which he was the only one allowed to move, and everyone else was furniture, and he meant to spend the whole night living in it. "Let the boy go," I said. I kept my voice level. It cost me something to keep it level. Or what keeper? He did not let go. He looked around my room slow, and his eye went over Mother Sennett and her daughter, over the young couple, over the tinker, over the family in the corner with the girl and the wooden horse, and over the quiet young man near them, and there his eye stopped, because the quiet young man was the only thing in the room that had not flinched, and a man like that cannot bear a thing that does not flinch. "And you," the loud man said to him, "you've been staring at me." The young man had not been staring. He had been doing the thing he had been doing all night, which was watching the room, the whole room, the door, the windows, the family in the corner, the way you watch a thing you are responsible for. But the loud man took that level, unbothered attention and felt it as an insult, the way his kind always does, because to a man who needs the world to flinch, a steady eye is a slap. "I asked you a question," he said, and let Tam go at last pushed him really, a small contemptuous push that sent the boy stumbling, and stood up from the carter's table and crossed the floor to stand over the young man in the corner. "I want you to see it the way I saw it." The loud man, big and wine-dark and ringed, leaning down over a seated young man in a plain cloak, with the whole room holding its breath, and the girl with the wooden horse no more than an arm's length away, her parents gone stiff with the particular fear of people who have a child near a thing that is about to break. And the young man looked up at him, just looked up, and said, in a voice so quiet I had to read it half off his lips from across the room, "Sir, there's a child at this table. I'd ask you to lower your voice." That was all, no threat in it, a request and a reason for the request and nothing else. It was, I think, the most dangerous thing anyone said all night, because it was the one thing the loud man had no answer for. You cannot bluster down a man who has only asked you to be quiet near a child. There is nowhere to put your anger, So he did what such men do when they are handed a thing they cannot answer. He reached for a bigger insult. He laughed loud for the room. "A child," he said, "listen to him. Listen to this one, the cloak and water man, the great defender." He turned to play it to the carter, to the tinker, to me, the way a bad actor turns to find his audience. "And what are you then, in your nice dark cloak with no badge on it, in your cup of water? Some gentleman's man, are you? A nursemaid? A footman walking that family somewhere because their own legs have failed?" He leaned closer. "You've the look of a servant who's been let above his station. I know the look. I keep 4 of you." The young man said nothing. He had gone back to being still. And here is the thing the loud man could not have known, the thing none of us in that room knew yet, the thing I would only understand fully near morning. The young man in the plain cloak was a KingsGuard. Not a guard the way you picture them, in red and tall black fur at the palace gate with the whole city watching. A guard on the road. A guard out of his bright feathers and into the plain dark cloak you wear when the work is not to be seen. Because the work, that week, was to walk a particular family 200 miles across the realm and have no one anywhere ever notice that they were worth walking. The brightest thing the KingsGuard does is stand at the gate. The hardest thing it does is the road, in the dark cloak, where the discipline has no crowd to witness it and no stone wall to lean its back against. Only an inn full of strangers and a loud man building a kingdom out of other people's fear. I did not know any of that. I only knew that I had in my common room a cruel rich man who would not stop, and one young stranger who would not flinch, and a child between them, and a long night still to burn down to its end. So I did the only thing a keeper can do. I went to the well for more water, and I prayed to whatever listens that the night would end with nothing broken but my cheap crockery. It did not. The loud man's name, I learned, was Master Orrin Vance, and he was a wool factor, a buyer and seller of fleece on the grand scale, the sort of man who never touches a sheep, but owns the price of every sheep for 100 miles. He told us this himself, unasked, several times, in the way that such men announce their weight to a room as if the room had been waiting all its life to be crushed by it. He was riding east to a great wool market with 2 servants and a clerk, and he had stopped at the Saltway because there is nowhere else to stop, and he meant to make my house pay for the insult of being the only roof on the high road. He found his next sport at the reckoning. There is a thing that happens at an inn with the road going rich, and it is this. When the food has been eaten and the wine drunk and the warmth taken, the bill comes, and a certain kind of man discovers all at once that the bill is an outrage. He will eat your pie and praise it, and then, when you ask him to pay for the pie, he will look at you as if you have tried to rob him on the road. Vance was a master of it. He went down my reckoning line by line, loudly, mocking each entry 6 pence for a bed. Was I mad? He'd not stable a horse for 6 pence. And at the bottom of it he counted out less than half of what was owed and slid it across the counter and dared me, with his eyes, to say a word. "That's not the half of it, sir," I said. "Look, the wine alone." The wine was vinegar. He had drunk 3 bottles of it. Be glad I'm paying for vinegar at all. Now, you'll fetch my clerk a fresh candle, and you'll fetch it without that face, or I'll have a word in the market about the kind of house the Saltway is, and you'll have no trade by midsummer. Do you understand me, keeper? One word from me." He let it sit. "I am known. You are not. That is the whole of the law on this road, and you know it as well as I do." And the worst of it was that he was right, and everyone in the room knew he was right, and that knowing was the cold floor under the whole night. He could cheat me, and there was no help for it, because he was known and I was not, and the law was 2 days east, and the only court out here is the court of who is loudest and who is richest, and in that court he had already won. I took the half payment. I took it because the alternative was worse, and he watched me take it, and he smiled, because a man like that does not enjoy the money he saves. He enjoys watching you fold. That is the whole of it. The money is nothing to him. The folding is everything. Then he turned the night onto the one servant of his I had not yet noticed, And that is where it went from cruelty to something I will not forget. The servant's name was Wick, a thin, gray, beaten-down man of perhaps 50, who had clearly served Vance for years and had been ground down by it the way a step is ground down by feet. He had been sitting apart all evening, eating nothing, taking up no room, the way a man learns to do when his master begrudges him the air. And Vance, having beaten me and beaten the boy and beaten the carter from his table, and finding the quiet young stranger in the corner still beyond his reach, turned to the one creature in the room he was certain he owned. "Wick, my boots are filthy. The roads in this miserable country are filthy, and so are my boots. Clean them here, now." He put his feet up on the bench, and the old man got down on the floor of my common room with a rag and began to clean the boots of the man who would not pay his bill. And Vance ate a heel of bread he had not paid for and talked over the old man's bent gray head about what a poor sort of servant he was, how slow, how clumsy, how he'd had to thrash the worth into him over 20 years and it had never quite taken. He did it for the room. He did it loud. He wanted us all to watch a man be made small, because a man who can make another man small in front of strangers feels, for that moment, very large. And the old man cleaned the boots and said, "Yes, Master Vance," and "Sorry, Master Vance," and his hands shook, and the whole room sat in its sick silence, and I stood behind my counter with my own half-payment in my apron, and could not think of one single thing that I, Halding Crow, 2 days from the law, could do about any of it. It was then that the young man in the corner stood up. He did it without drama. He simply rose the way a man rises when a thing has gone far enough and the next thing must be him. And he crossed the floor, not fast, not slow, and he did not go to Vance. He went to the old servant on the floor. And he crouched down beside him, easy on his heels, and took the second boot out of the loud man's astonished reach, and he said to the old man quietly just for him, "Sit up, friend. You've cleaned enough boots tonight." And he set the boot down on the floorboards gently, and he held out a hand and helped the old man up off his knees, and he steadied him, and he walked him slow, unhurried, an arm under his elbow to the bench by the fire where the warmth was, and he sat him down in the best seat in my house, the one I keep clear for paying lords, and he said, "Sit there. Rest. No one's going to ask anything more of you tonight." You could have heard a moth in that room. Vance came up off the bench. "What?" he said, and for the first time all night the loudness had a crack in it, because nothing in his whole life had taught him what to do when a thing simply will not play its part. "What do you think you're doing with my man?" The young guard turned and faced him, and he was not angry. I have stood close to anger all my keeping life, and I know its smell, and this was not it. This was something steadier and colder and far worse for Vance than anger would have been. "He's not your man tonight," the guard said. "Tonight he's a tired old fellow sitting by a fire. You can hire his hours. You can't have him on his knees in another man's house for sport. That's not yours to buy." A pause. "Sit down, Master Vance. Pay the keeper what you owe him. And let the room have its peace." And Vance, I watched it happen, Vance reached, the way his kind always reaches when the words run out, for the one argument that has never failed him in his life. He reached for force. He was bigger than the young man. He had 30 pounds on him and the wine in him and 20 years of never once being told no. And he stepped in close and put his big ringed hand flat on the young man's chest and shoved. A real shove. All his weight behind it. The shove that had cleared his road for him since he was a boy. The young man did not move. I do not mean he held his ground bravely, swaying. I mean he did not move. Vance's whole weight went into him and met something that was simply there, the way the well-house wall is there, and the loud man's own force came back up his own arm and rocked him a half-step backward onto his heels. And for one moment, one single moment that I would not trade for the deed to a better in Master or in Vance, Wolf Factor, known man, lord of the high road, stood in the middle of my common room with his pushing hand still flat against a stranger's chest, and a look on his face like a man who has put his shoulder to a door he was sure was a door, and found it was the side of a mountain. "You don't want to do that again, sir," the guard said, still quiet. "Truly, you don't." A wiser man would have heard it. There was no boast in it, and that is exactly what should have frightened Vance, because a man who is sure of himself does not need to raise his voice, and the young guard's certainty was the flattest, calmest thing I ever heard. But Vance was not a wise man. He was a loud one, and the two are not the same, and the great tragedy of the loud is that they cannot tell the difference between a man who is afraid and a man who is merely quiet. And so they keep walking into the second kind thinking it is the first, all their lives, until one of them stops them. "Do you know who I am?" Vance said. "It was not a question, it is never a question. It is the spell such men say, the one that has always worked," and he said it now with the absolute faith of a man saying words that have never once failed to open a door. "Do you know who I am? I will have you whipped off this road. I will have your master, whoever's man you are, I will have him ruined for keeping a servant who lays hands on his betters. One word from me in the right ear and you are nothing. You hear me? Nothing." He was working himself back up now, finding his feet again, because a bully who has been checked must roar twice as loud to cover the silence where his shove failed. "Who are you? Who? Are you?" And the young man answered him. He did not answer the way I expected. He did not name his rank. I would not learn that until later, and even then only because the old servant told me. He did not pull out a badge or a writ or a seal. He looked at Vance and he said, in that same low, even voice that carried to every corner of my silent room, "I'm nobody you need to know, sir. I'm a man walking a family home. That's all I am tonight." He let that sit a moment. "But you should think very carefully about the next hour. Because you've spent the whole night certain that no one here will ever say a word against you, that you're known and these good people aren't, and that the law is far and you are near, and so you can do as you like. And you're right about the law being far." He glanced once at the door and back. "But you've made a mistake that men like you always make. You looked at a room full of people you decided were no one, and you didn't count them." I did not understand it at the time. Vance did not understand it, but the young guard had said the truest thing of the night, and it was already coming true, and none of us could see it yet. Because here is what was happening in my common room while Vance roared, the thing I only assembled afterward, the way you assemble a broken cup. The young couple by the wall, the two children with everything they owned in 2 sacks. The boy had quietly slipped out the side door into the cold a quarter hour before, when the boots came off and went on to old Wick's knees, and he had not gone to his bed. He had gone to the stable. And in the stable that night, sleeping in the straw because the Saltways beds cost 6pence and they had not got 6pence, were 3 drovers off the western flocks, big men, sober men who had heard the whole afternoon's shouting drift across the yard and had been waiting, the way honest men wait, for someone to tell them it was their business. The young husband had told them. They were awake now. They were pulling on their boots. And the tinker, the silent tinker who had sat all night mending a pot he had already mended, was a tinker who walked the whole eastern road 4 times a year, every market town on it, and knew every reeve and bailiff and constable between the mountains and the sea by their first names, because a tinker who does not know who to be polite to does not stay a tinker long. And he had been listening to Master Orrin Vance, wool factor, name his own name to a room over and over all night, the way a vain man cannot help doing. And the tinker had a long memory and a longer road, and he was already composing, behind his mild mending face, the story he would tell at every fire between here and the coast. And Pell the carter and his 2 slow honest sons at the window had stood up, not to fight. They had simply stood, the 3 of them, big as doorposts, and moved without hurry, without a word, to stand between Vance and the family in the corner, and between Vance and the old man by the fire, so that wherever the loud man turned now there was an honest shoulder in the way. And Mother Sennett, 80 if she was a day, had taken out from her shawl a small worn book and a stub of pencil. She was a parish clerk's widow and had kept her dead husband's habit her whole life, and she was writing. She was writing it all down: the cup, the boots, the half payment, the shove. The name Orrin Vance, wool factor, said aloud 9 times by the man himself. She wrote in a small, steady hand, and she did not hide that she was writing. And when Vance's eye fell on her and he barked, "What are you doing, you old crow?" she looked up at him over the little book and said, in the clear, carrying voice of a woman who has buried a husband and is afraid of nothing left on this earth, "I'm taking it down, young man. Every word. There's always somebody taking it down. You only thought there wasn't." The guard had told him the truth. He had looked at a room full of people he decided were no one, and he had not counted them. And one by one, without a blow struck, without a voice raised but the loud man's own, the room he had spent all night making into furniture was standing up out of its silence and becoming, in front of his eyes, a court. Vance felt it turn. I will give him that. He was not stupid, only cruel, and the two are different. And a cruel man can read a room very well right up to the moment it stops being his. He felt the carter's shoulders move into his path. He saw the old widow's pencil. He heard, through the wall, the stable door bang, and 3 sets of heavy boots cross the cold yard toward my front step. And the spell he had said his whole life, "Do you know who I am?" stopped working, all at once, the way a coin stops being gold the moment a true man bites it. So he did the last thing, the thing the proud do when the room turns and the words fail, and the law they always counted on being far suddenly feels near. He went for the child. Not to harm her. I do not believe even Vance meant harm, and I will not write it worse than it was. He meant a hostage to his pride. He saw the family in the corner go to gather the little girl with the wooden horse, saw the one soft thing left in the room that the quiet guard so plainly stood for, and he lunged for the table to seize the moment back, to grab the child's arm, to make the guard come to him, to be the one who moved the room again, even if it was the last move he ever made in it. He never reached her. The guard had been still all night, and now I learned what the stillness had been for. It had not been weakness, and it had not been rest. It had been the drawn bow. Vance lunged, and the young man was simply there between the loud man and the child, faster than I could see him cross the floor, and he took Vance's reaching arm at the wrist and the elbow in 2 white-knuckled hands, and he turned it. Not a blow, not a break, nothing a magistrate could ever call an assault, just a turn, clean and exact and final, and the great wool factor went down onto the floorboards of my common room slow and helpless as a felled tree, face to the wood. One arm folded up gentle and immovable behind him, held there by a man half his weight who was not even breathing hard. "Be still now," the guard said to him, low, almost kind. "It's done. You'll lie there until these good people decide it's done, and not a moment before. I'd hold your tongue, Master Vance. You've said quite enough for one night, and a great deal of it's been written down." And that was the whole of the violence. One turn, no fist, no boot, no blood on my floor. 20 years of Vance's shoving answered in a single quiet motion that left him face down and unhurt and finished. And the only sound in my common room was the fire and the wool factor's breathing and the small clear voice of Mother Sennett, who had not stopped writing, saying to her daughter, "And the guard set him down without a mark. You saw it. No man can say otherwise." The drovers came in then, 3 big sober men filling my doorway, and behind them the young husband, white-faced and proud, and there was a moment when it could have gone ugly, when 3 angry, honest men might have decided to add their own coin to the night's reckoning. But the guard never let it. "He's down and he's done," he said to them, not letting go, not getting up. "There's no more to do but the right way. Is there a reeve within a day of here?" There was. The tinker knew him, knew his name, his house, the color of his door, and one of the drovers had a fast horse and was gone before the loud man had got his breath back, riding through the cold dark to fetch the law that Master Orrin Vance had wagered his whole life would always be too far away to matter. It was not too far away, it only took a night. The reeve came near dawn, a broad, sensible man on a tired horse, and he found my common room transformed into the most orderly court ever held under a thatched roof. Mother Senate read him her little book in her clear parish clerk's voice, every entry, every hour. The carter and his sons told what they saw. The tinker named 3 other roads where Master Vance was known and not loved. The young husband and the 3 drovers stood witness. Even old Wick, sitting still in the warm seat by the fire where the guard had set him, told the reeve in a wondering voice, as if hearing his own words for the first time in 20 years, exactly what his master had done to him on the floor of a stranger's inn for sport. And the guard gave his account last and shortest, and it was the lightest hand of all. He did not accuse. He did not embroider. He told only what was needed, that a man had shoved him and lunged at a child and been set down without harm, and that the keeper's reckoning had been cheated of better than half, and that every word of it had been seen by a roomful of honest people here, all of whom were still present and would all say the same. He never once raised his rank. The reeve, who had eyes, looked at the plain dark cloak and the still young face, and the way the drovers and the carter all stood a little straighter when the young man spoke, and he asked, quiet, just between the 2 of them, who the young fellow served. And the guard told him just as quiet, and I did not hear it, but I saw the reeve's back straighten, and I saw him give the young man a small nod that was almost a salute, and I knew then what I had been too busy to see all night, that the cloak-and-water man, the one Vance had called a footman, a nursemaid, a servant led above his station, was the very thing the loud man had sworn no road like mine would ever hold. A king's man on the king's business, with the whole weight of the law he thought was far standing quietly in my corner the entire time, drinking water, watching a child. Master Orrin Vance paid my full reckoning before he left, every penny, counted out by his own ringed hand under the reeve's eye, and he paid old Wick a year's honest wage besides, and was made to set the man free of his service then and there, in writing, witnessed, because the reeve, having heard it all, judged that a man who would put a servant on his knees for sport in front of strangers had forfeited the right to keep one. Wick stayed at the Saltway. He works my fire to this day, and he has never once in all the years since gone down on his knees to any man, and I see to it that he never has to. And the charges the reeve carried east against Vance, the assault on a king's escort, the cheated reckoning, the lunge that a roomful of witnesses called what it was, those went where Vance's own boasted name could not save him, into the courts of the towns where he was known, where the tinker's story had got there first, and the great wolf factor learned, late and hard, that being known cuts the other way once the room has stood up. He sold no wool at that market. I am told he is not loud any more. The guard left at first light with his family, for that is what I had finally understood them to be, his to deliver, a quiet gray man and a woman and a little girl with a wooden horse who mattered enough to the king, that one of his own walked them 200 miles in a plain cloak so that no one would ever think to ask why. The girl stopped at my door on the way out and gave me the wooden horse, gravely, the way a child gives you the most important thing she owns, and her father started to take it back and the guard, gently, told him to let her. I have it still. It stands on the shelf above my fire, next to the well-worn books, and when the high-road rich come through my house loud and ringed and certain that the law is far and they are near, I look at the little wooden horse, and I am not afraid of them any more. I asked the young man one thing at the door before he went. I asked him how he had stayed so still all those hours, with the boots and the cheating and the cruelty, when any honest man's blood would have been up, and he thought about it and he said, "The stillness wasn't for him, keeper, it was for them." He nodded back at the warm room, at the old man by the fire, at the family waiting in the cold dawn. A man who's truly ready doesn't have to look it. He just has to be there when it's needed, and not a moment sooner. He pulled the plain cloak around himself. Loud is what you are when you're afraid no one's watching. Still is what you are when you've decided to be the one who is. Then he walked his family off down the high road into the gray, and I went back inside to my fire and my freed servant and my full reckoning and my roomful of no ones who had stood up. And I have run the Saltway 31 years and 4 more since, and I have never had a better night, nor a clearer lesson. The loud man owns the road right up until the quiet one decides he doesn't, and out here, 2 days from anywhere, that is the only law that has ever truly held.